Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks so much for joining the conversation. The rise of electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles will require a transformation in battery technology, the charging infrastructure, and the electric grid. We're joined today by Sam Abuelsamid. He is Principal Analyst for e-mobility at Guidehouse Insights, a market research company that tracks a wide range of electrification issues from battery technology and mobility to smart cities and the distributed energy grid that's evolving around us. 14% of all new cars globally in 2022 were EVs, and the International Energy Agency estimates that sales will increase by another 35% to 18.9% of all cars sold this year. China accounts for more than half of global sales. In the United States, EVs accounted for 7.2% of car sales in the first quarter of 2023, and plug-in hybrids about 13% of sales. So about 20% of all the cars sold will need new battery technology. As we've heard during previous interviews, the battery supply chain is still forming, and lithium, as well as several critical minerals, are in short supply. Recycling will play a key role in making enough batteries for the growing electric and hybrid fleet, as well as keeping all those materials in use over generations of battery and other forms of storage. Sam's team recently published a report called Developing Solutions for Recycling End-of-Life EV Batteries. So let's get the rundown on the latest innovations that can help power decarbonized transportation. You can learn more about Guidehouse at guidehouseinsights.com. Guidehouse Insights is all one word, no space, no dash, guidehouseinsights.com. Welcome to the show, Sam. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well.
Well, thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here. Before we get into talking about recycling batteries, I just want to ask, has the EV battery supply chain recovered in the sense that we can say this completely from the pandemic-related supply chain issues that we were facing?
It seems like most of the supply chain challenges that we were facing over the past couple of years didn't really affect cell production so much as it did things like, for example, battery management systems, because, of course, they use a lot of chips. And near as we can determine, there aren't any major disruptions going on right now, but that can always change. Depending on what happens, either from a natural disaster standpoint or geopolitical tensions. But for the moment, at least, that part of it is fine. There are some issues. For example, GM has had a lot of trouble building their new Ultium batteries, apparently because the supplier of the automation equipment that they were going to use to assemble the modules for those battery packs has not delivered on time, or they've had issues. They haven't been entirely clear exactly what the problem is. So they've been implementing some manual module assembly lines at their various assembly plants to fill in until they can get that automation equipment working.
So the materials aren't the issue; it's the robots to build the battery system.
In this particular instance, that is the case. Yeah.
Well, Ultium and GM have been having a lot of challenges. That's actually not so surprising.
Yeah.
The International Energy Agency just released an interim report on our progress toward net zero, and they're projecting about a 400% increase in the cost of lithium and other critical minerals over the next decade. Do you see us achieving a scale of production that will counteract those rising prices so that consumers don't see the cost of an EV going up and up and up?
I certainly hope so. I think we will manage to achieve that. Certainly the companies that are investing tens of billions of dollars in new cell manufacturing plants are hoping that the rest of the supply chain will be able to keep up in terms of producing the raw materials. So we've got a lot of developments going on in various regions. One of the interesting developments is a shift towards localizing production, both extraction and processing of raw materials, along with the production of the batteries themselves. So extracting as much of those materials as we can in the same regions where the batteries are being produced, where they're going into vehicles, where those vehicles will ultimately be used, and where those vehicles and batteries will reach their end of life and then ultimately be recycled. So we're seeing a lot of development of new lithium production in North America and Europe. Traditionally, just because of the amount of demand that there has been in the past for lithium, most of it was concentrated in South America and Australia, with most of the processing in China. But that is shifting towards domestic production in the regions where the materials are being used.
This idea of a closed loop is critical to our achieving a circular economy. Now, as you think about what you just described, are we able to, once we get the material into a region, so assuming, for instance, I'm in the Pacific Northwest, there's not a lot of lithium, but if we brought it in, could we literally be making, installing, recycling those batteries over and over, keeping that material in use? Is that feasible given the recycling system?
Yeah, that is the long-term plan. And when I say local, I regional, general, I mean continental. Okay. At least on the same continent, if not necessarily in the same state or region. But yeah, but keeping that material in that circular economy. With one of the great things about batteries is that they are fairly straightforward to recycle. With lithium-ion batteries, we can extract about up to 98% of the critical minerals from end-of-life batteries and put that material right back into the new production cycle. Now, the challenge, of course, is that there is a pretty, these batteries have a fairly long lifespan, especially EV batteries, much more so than consumer electronics batteries. And so there's a fairly long lag time between when we first produce batteries and when we have enough recycled materials to make that into a more circular supply chain. Up to this point in North America, we've only sold a couple of million EVs through over the past 10, 15 years. Mm-hmm. And most of those have been in the last 5 years. So the vast majority of the EVs that have ever been sold in North America are still in use and will probably be in use at least through the end of this decade, which means that there's going to be a limited supply of end-of-life batteries until sometime well into the 2030s. Now, that said, the battery production process does inherently have some scrap associated with it. We also have consumer electronics batteries. And so recycling is already happening. And those materials are being fed back into the battery production supply chain. And the percentage of recycled materials going into batteries will continue to climb over the next 10, 15, 20 years as more batteries, more end-of-life batteries become available.
Do you envision us stocking up with enough lithium and other critical minerals that at some point we're no longer needing to extract, or will we always need to extract to some degree?
Well, probably
people have.
Yeah, we'll probably always need to extract some. I don't think it's, the nature of physics and chemistry will probably never get to 100% efficiency. There will be some material that's lost. Potentially as if you have economic growth, if there's more demand for batteries, you will need some supply of virgin materials. But the proportion of virgin materials and the absolute amount of virgin materials that are required for the battery demand will probably decline over the long term. But that's, as I said, we're talking a fairly long period of time, at least 20 years before we're in that kind of situation.
Now, in your report, you project that EVs are going to account for about 47% of car sales by 2030, which is great progress. How do you see the breakdown between full EVs and plug-in hybrids evolving, given a lot of the concerns people have about, for instance, driving range?
So our most recent forecasts, we're projecting about 35% BEV market share globally in 2030. So a little more than a third of all the vehicles in 2030, and then probably about somewhere between 5 and 10% of total vehicle market share, light duty vehicle market share, would be plug-in hybrids. So we do project a not insignificant amount of plug-in hybrids. Where there's probably going to be actually a significant amount of growth between now and the end of the decade is in traditional hybrids, non-plug-in hybrids. Mm-hmm. offer a lot of advantages in terms of reducing carbon emissions. It obviously requires a lot less battery material to do a hybrid. Right. You can get dramatically better energy efficiency out of a hybrid than out of a straight internal combustion vehicle. And for a lot of applications where, until we really can drive the cost of batteries down, improve the production efficiency, get the scale, there's still a lot of good use cases for both hybrid and plug-in hybrid vehicles to fill the gap until we can go completely electric.
I'd be curious, if you were going to buy a car this year, what type would you buy? Would you buy an EV, a plug-in hybrid, or a traditional hybrid?
For myself, for my family, sure. At this point, I would probably go with a hybrid if I was buying in 2023. But if I look out 2 years from now, 2025, then I would probably go with a BEV. I could act in terms of the usability of a BEV, for the use case of my household, it would be fine. We don't, there's plenty of BEVs out there with more than enough range to meet our needs. So that wouldn't be an issue, but it's just the affordability of BEVs. There's not a lot of options in more affordable BEVs today, and something, under $35,000 that I would necessarily want to buy today. But if I was buying in 2025, which is about the time frame when we will probably be replacing the vehicle we have in our garage today, a 2017 Honda Civic, then I am fully anticipating buying a BEV to replace that Civic in a couple of years.
So Guidehouse, I take it, sees driving range becoming a non-issue by 2025?
I think range itself is largely a non-issue for most people today.
Unless they're driving a long way. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. The 80 to 85% of all daily driving in the U.S. is less than 40 miles a day. Mm-hmm. And pretty much, every BEV on the market can handle that. And if you have a BEV with 200 to 250 miles of driving range, that is more than sufficient to meet everybody's needs, even in worst case conditions. And you're in Minnesota, I'm in Michigan, you get cold winters, you lose a significant amount of range when it's very cold weather, when there's snow on the roads. You still have more than enough capacity to handle your daily driving needs. If you have the ability to charge at home overnight, no problem at all. That's a non-issue. Where it becomes more of an issue is if you need a vehicle that can tow longer distances. Certainly here in Michigan, if you've ever been to Michigan, either in the summertime or the wintertime, you take a drive up I-75 from the Detroit area from Southeast Michigan up towards Northern Michigan on any Friday afternoon. Most of the year, you're going to find lots of SUVs and trucks pulling either boats or jet skis or snowmobiles in the wintertime. And then same thing coming back. For those kinds of use cases right now, EVs still aren't up to the task, and we don't have enough charging infrastructure. I would say to the degree that there's a challenge, it's not so much of a range anxiety problem anymore. It's a charging anxiety problem. Having the chargers where you need them, having them be reliable, which is a real serious issue right now. And this is why we're seeing the auto industry rapidly shift away from the CCS connectors, adopting the NACS charging connector developed by Tesla, and doing deals to use the Tesla superchargers because they have the most reliable charging network. Hopefully the NEVI program will help to address that charging anxiety problem. So we have more chargers in more places, and also hopefully guarantee better reliability and performance of those chargers.
What's your projection in terms of charging improvement or coverage over the next several years? Are we going to get to a point where it won't be necessary to sit and wait for a charger and then sit on the charger for 2 or 3 hours? Are we going to have supercharging capacity available for everyone?
Yeah, I think, within the next 5 years, we'll certainly, I think, have enough capacity it'll be in line with the growth of EV sales. So, waiting for a charger will probably be less of an issue. hopefully the reliability will improve, so that you don't get to a charger and find, sorry, out of service, which is something that happens very rarely with gas pumps. Yeah. And the speed of charging will also improve. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that DC charging, while it's very convenient in a lot of respects, I mean, you can charge vehicles like some vehicles like the Kia EV6 and the Hyundai Ioniq 5 or Ioniq 6, to 80% charge in under 20 minutes on a 350 kilowatt charger. So it's not that big a deal in terms of waiting around. You definitely don't have to wait around multiple hours, but it is more expensive. And so you do lose a lot of the cost benefit of driving an EV if you are DC fast charging all the time. Ideally, what people would be doing is doing AC charging most of the time and only using fast charging when they actually need to do longer trips.
In fact, I've found that myself, but it still ends up being a net gain compared to gas based on my experience. Do you all see that as well?
Yeah. I mean, if you're looking at total cost of ownership over a longer period of time, then there is definitely a net gain. There's lower operating costs. But again, if you are, that's using a mix of AC and DC charging. If you're relying on DC fast charging all the time, you probably actually aren't going to save that much compared to gas because it's costly. I mean, you go to an Electrify America station today, it's up to 48 cents a kilowatt hour. And some friends of mine who run a site called TFL YouTube channels, they recently tested the new Chevy Silverado EV, did a towing test with it, and they ran that side by side with an F-150 hybrid, and they found that over I think about 150 mile towing loop, or actually almost 200 mile towing loop, that the cost to fast charge the truck, the Silverado, was only $1 less than the cost to put gas in the F-150. So DC fast charging is more costly. So I think people will prefer the lower cost. If you can do the lower cost, and there's also less stress on the battery. The battery will last better if you're not fast charging it all the time. So this is why, in addition to the fast charging, we also need to have a dramatic expansion of AC charging, level 2 charging, especially as EVs get into the used vehicle market. So up until this point, most of the people buying EVs are buying new cars. But the thing that most people don't think about is that most people don't buy new cars. Most people only ever buy used cars. And we sell about 3 times as many used cars every year in the US as we do new cars. And so when you look at new car buyers, they tend to be more affluent. They're more likely to live in a single family home with off-street parking. Used car buyers are much more likely to live in multi-unit dwellings, condos, apartments, or even in single family homes. They'll be in older neighborhoods where they have to park on the street. And so we need a dramatic expansion of curbside charging, workplace charging, school charging, AC charging in locations where vehicles are going to be sitting for extended periods of time, either overnight or during the course of the day. And that will be much more cost effective, both for the owners as well as for the cost of the infrastructure to do that.
Do you see that coming to fruition within this decade?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think, in a lot of areas, for example, in California, there's requirements to have charging capability on new construction. And, there's a number of companies working on various solutions, and there's already things being deployed, particularly in Europe, more so in Europe so far than in the US. But I think we'll see a lot more curbside charging solutions being deployed here in the US that can take advantage of places where there is some power. You don't need nearly as much power capacity for curbside AC charging as you do for DC charging. And so it's much more straightforward to install that. And I think we will see that happening during the course of this decade.
That's great to hear. And this is a fascinating conversation. I want to take a quick commercial break. We're going to be right back. And we're back to continue the conversation with Sam Abuelsamid. He is principal analyst for e-mobility at Guidehouse Insights. Sam, this is a lot of great information so far, but I want to go back a bit and talk about the role that the automaker and the dealer need to rethink in our relationship with a car so that they become not just the key collection point for EV batteries when we're done with them, but in terms of helping us manage our relationship with the asset itself. Do we need to rethink the way we own vehicles now that something like a battery needs to be stewarded over many generations of use?
Yeah, absolutely. The whole business model around vehicles and more specifically around batteries needs to evolve. One of the challenges that we're going to face with recycling, for example, is how do we get batteries from a vehicle at the end of its life, potentially put it into a second use application, in a stationary storage, and then from there get it to a recycler to be reprocessed into materials to build new batteries. The ownership model of the battery, I think, really needs to be rethought. And this has been attempted a few times in various places, without too much success so far. The idea of, buying a vehicle, leasing the battery, consumers haven't really bought into that whole concept, but I think it's something that we need to pursue. And perhaps, one of the solutions, in our recent report that we put out there is the idea that perhaps, with the leasing model, what we actually have is a third party that actually owns the batteries throughout their entire lifespan. And so what you have is you go and buy a vehicle and you are paying, some usage fee for the battery that depends on how many miles you've driven it, what kind of use case you've had. So the more you use it, the more you pay for it. And that money goes back to the third party that has owned that battery from the time it has left the battery manufacturing facility, and they own it until it goes back to a recycler. And part of those funds, gets set aside to pay for the cost of collection and processing of the battery at the end of its life. So if it goes from a vehicle and then goes into a second life application in stationary storage, as long as it's in that stationary storage, that third party continues to generate some revenue from that battery. And over the life of the battery, they recover the cost plus some reasonable margin, and also have some that has been set aside to cover the cost of collection and reprocessing of that battery. That's one approach. The idea of battery swap is also out there. NIO's had some success with it in China. And that's one solution. There's a lot of challenges around that because there are no standards for the battery pack format. Fleets for fleet applications, I think it can actually work really well. But we do need to rethink the whole model of the battery ownership and make that separate from the vehicle ownership.
Well, taking it up a level then, following on what you just said, should we think of owning a car as really leasing a collection of services?
Yeah. Certainly that is what the automakers would like it to be. They would, for 130 plus years, the model has been you sell, design and build and sell a vehicle, and then the relationship between the manufacturer and the customer is done. And aside from maybe selling some service parts, or doing warranty work, there's no ongoing revenue from that vehicle once it's been delivered to a vehicle or to a customer. So one of the things that automakers would love is to have a recurring revenue stream. Mm-hmm. And so we've got companies, a number of companies that have experimented with various kinds of subscription plans. Volvo's probably been the most successful with their Care by Volvo plan, mm-hmm. where it's essentially a newer kind of lease program where you have a flat monthly payment that includes the vehicle, maintenance, and insurance for that vehicle. And then after 12 months, you can turn it in and exchange it for a different a different model, or get a newer vehicle, some new features. That's one approach. Companies are experimenting with different models, trying to find things that work, that makes sense for the consumer from a financial standpoint, and also makes sense for the manufacturer from a logistics standpoint.
I mean, thinking about the way that automakers must look at smartphone manufacturers' business models with envy, is it could we see a charging network like a cell phone network provide you a vehicle, and what you really do is subscribe to the charging network? Is that something that we should be thinking about?
That's certainly a possibility. One of the key differences between automotive and consumer electronics, particularly phones, is vehicles are much longer life products. The average age of vehicles in the US today is 12 and a half years. And it's not at all unusual to have 20 and 30-year-old vehicles still running around. I mean, I have a 34-year-old car in my garage next to that Civic I mentioned. And so they last a lot longer, which makes it a little more challenging to come up with these new kinds of business models where you have a recurring revenue stream. Phones last 2, 3, maybe 4 years, and then you're ready to replace it anyway. And so that makes it a lot more difficult to replicate the same kind of continuous recurring revenue stream that you have in the technology industry.
Well, it's all technology in the long run. Now, you wrote in September that the battery pack may soon become obsolete, and you talked about two new form factors, the cell to pack and the cell to body approach. Can you explain them briefly and tell us, are they more serviceable as well?
Actually, it's the opposite. They're less serviceable.
Really? Okay.
But, so the traditional battery architecture we've had up to this point is what's referred to as a modular architecture. So you have individual cells that are packed into a box, call it a module, which is essentially a smaller battery. And then a bunch of modules are packed into a bigger box. And the part of the reason that they did that, they came up with that architecture when they first started the modern EV era, is both because of concerns with safety and thermal runaway, by isolating smaller portions of the battery pack, trying to limit the spread of a fire if there was a fire in the battery, but also to make it more serviceable, so that if you had a problem with some cells in the battery pack, you could replace just a single module instead of replacing the entire pack. And that's what Chevrolet did when they had their recall on the Bolts. Most of those, they didn't replace the entire pack. They tested all the modules and replaced individual modules in most vehicles. The problem with that is that by having a box in a box with cells in a box is there's a lot of wasted space there. Every one of those boxes takes up physical volume. And so if you look at the total volume of a modular battery pack, the amount of that volume that is actually active cell material that's storing electrical energy, is typically somewhere in the range of about 30 to 35%, which is not great. And so the first step that we've seen away from that is what we call cell to pack or a structural pack. Tesla talked about that back at their 2020 battery day. They're doing that for some of their battery packs now. Others are starting to do that, where you eliminate the module. So you take out one step of that. And so you just have the one large box, and you take all your cells and stack them together, glue them together, insert this giant brick of cells into your battery pack. And so now you can potentially have, and this is something that there's a startup here in Michigan called Our Next Energy that's doing this with LFP, lithium iron phosphate cells. They're able to get 75% of the volume of the battery pack is active cell material that's storing energy. So you've doubled that fill ratio. So within the same size pack, you can have twice as much energy storage. And then the next phase of that was something that was shown. I was at the IAA Mobility Show in Munich in early September, where BYD showed off their new Seal electric sedan. And the Seal goes to what they call cell to body. So instead of, even with the cell to pack design, you still have a floor on the car and the frame rails, and you're bolting that battery pack, that box, up to that floor and the frame rails. What BYD has done, and also what Tesla has done with their structural pack, but in a slightly different way, is they eliminate the box entirely. So what you have is a cavity in the bottom of the body shell, and they take their cells, glue them together into a big block, put that up into the bottom of the body of the car, put their cooling system in there, put a bottom plate on there, and you no longer have a separate pack. It's all part of the body structure. And
well, that sounds like it should be easier to maintain or replace. Why isn't it?
Well, except that, because you're trying to pack the cells in as tight as you can, what they do is they actually glue them together. Okay. So you can't really once you put them together, you can't really take it apart. You can take that entire block out of the body shell,
which is expensive and hard. Okay, got it.
Yeah, and recycle that. And I highly recommend, to see just how difficult this is. There's a company here in Michigan called Monroe & Associates that does benchmarking. And so they do teardowns of products, and they've done a lot of vehicle teardowns. They do some really interesting videos. They did a teardown of a Tesla Model Y with their 4680 structural pack, which is similar to the cell to body. What they've done is usually the body shell of the vehicle, you've got the top structure, and there's a floor pan, and then the battery is bolted to the bottom of the floor pan. They've actually eliminated the floor pan from this version of the Model Y. And so the battery pack actually forms the floor pan. So when they lower it out of the car, the seats are actually bolted directly to the top of the battery pack, and it forms the floor of the car. And if you check out their videos, you can see when they do the teardown of this battery pack, trying to pull those cells apart is extraordinarily difficult. In part, it was designed that way because you want it to be stiff. You want that extra structure to support the vehicle, but then it makes it essentially unserviceable.
Does the car itself then need to be recycled every time the battery runs out?
No. I mean, you can remove that block of cells and replace that. So, what they've done is they've eliminated a lot of parts. They've simplified the manufacturing. So it should dramatically actually reduce the cost of the vehicle because you've eliminated a lot of components. And what they've actually found is that over the first 15 years of the modern EV era is, there was back in 2008, there was a lot of uncertainty about how long these batteries were going to last. And what they've realized is that with proper battery management, proper cooling systems on these batteries, they actually last a lot longer than we thought they would. And so the need for servicing is actually far less than what was anticipated.
Sure.
So they've decided, okay, if we don't need to service this battery, then let's put it together in a way that we can take cost out of it and make it more accessible to more people.
Are there new battery chemistries that will make a battery, let's just say, virtually eternal? For instance, solid state batteries, will they run forever, or will they also need to be recycled?
So, I mean, nothing is forever. Everything has some lifespan, but to get to a really long lifespan, yeah, that is absolutely possible. And in fact, there's a chemistry that's out there that's actually been out there for a long time called lithium iron phosphate. So most EVs, particularly in North America and Europe, use lithium ion batteries that for the cathode material, they use a combination of nickel, cobalt, and mostly manganese. Sometimes, in some cases, like the GM Ultium cells, also aluminum. But nickel and cobalt are very expensive, and that's also what actually makes the batteries unstable and can lead to fires. Lithium iron phosphate, on the other hand, is incredibly stable and very safe. The downside, and it's also a lot cheaper. The iron and phosphorus are everywhere on the planet, and so the materials are readily available. They're cheap, and they're very safe. The downside is that there's less energy storage capacity with the iron chemistry than there is with the nickel chemistry. It's about somewhere between 30 and 40% less energy density, but it's also 30 to 40% cheaper. But if you combine LFP, that's lithium iron phosphate, is shortened to LFP. If you combine LFP with a cell to pack or a cell to body design, you can actually get better range, better capacity than you can with a nickel modular pack. And the company I mentioned, Our Next Energy, they built they took a Tesla Model S and took the stock nickel battery pack out of it, put in one of their prototype LFP packs, drove it over 750 miles on a charge.
So it's also the key to lowering the overall cost of the EV. Yes. And the battery, and that can potentially offset the rising cost of the critical minerals that we're talking about earlier.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, great. Now that's fascinating. Now, are there key innovations in the battery recycling industry that you're looking for over the next few years? Something that's going to be a big breakthrough?
I think the core process that's being used by most companies right now is something called hydrometallurgy, where essentially they take the batteries, cells, and modules, and they shred it down. They put it through what looks like essentially a giant paper shredder. It comes out in little strips, and then they process that in a solvent, and it breaks everything down, and they get what's known as the black mass out of that, which is the critical minerals, the nickel, cobalt, aluminum, manganese, and so on, and the copper, and then they can reprocess that. That is a fairly well-known process now. Companies like Redwood Materials, Li-Cycle, Ascend, and a few others are all doing this now. The next step, is the actual reprocessing of that black mass to get it back into a form that can go back into the battery production process. And there's some interesting stuff happening there with a couple of companies. There's one called Nth Element that is doing a process with where they're a more energy efficient process for separating the materials in that black mass.
Their CEO has been on the show.
Yeah, Aqua Metals is another one that's doing something similar. So there's a lot of interesting things happening there that will make that whole process more energy efficient, lower cost, faster. So you can go from an end of life battery to materials that you can put into new batteries more quickly and more cost effectively.
The federal government has put $2 billion into Redwood Materials with a loan through the Department of Energy. Mm-hmm. Are there other efforts or incentive programs that we should be thinking about putting in place in order to drive higher recovery rates of batteries overall, not just EV batteries, but all batteries, as well as the adoption of EVs?
Yeah, I think, doing something to help develop some of what I talked about earlier with the business models around batteries, to help develop that business model of how we go from recover, from the battery at end of life to a recycler. There's, I'm blanking on the name of the company right now. There's a company I spoke with recently that they've developed a model and a process where they've created an online marketplace. So working with some OEMs to get data for their model to understand what is the value of any given battery. So now if a vehicle, gets totaled out, goes to a wrecking yard, the operator can put in the VIN number of that vehicle into the system, get an estimate, for what is the value of that battery. If they accept the price for that battery, then this company will go out and they have some logistics partners that will go out and collect the batteries, pay these wrecking yards, and so they aggregate them and then sell them on to the recyclers like Redwood and Li-Cycle and so on. So they're creating a marketplace for end of life batteries. So that's another alternative solution. So supporting the development of some of these business models and operational models for how to handle the batteries at end of life is an area where we should probably be giving some extra support to help develop these ideas and find ones that work so that we can extract the value out of these batteries and then get them back into that circular economy.
So does that suggest that we just need to help them kickstart? There isn't a need for ongoing incentive programs such as a tax credit for returning your vehicle to get the battery materials back?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we need to find models that don't rely on ongoing tax incentives. I mean, that's not something that we can do in perpetuity. Mm-hmm. So we've got to find sustainable business models that are both environmentally sustainable but also financially sustainable. Otherwise, it's all eventually going to collapse in on itself. So it is key to help develop these models, but in a way that they can be self-sustaining.
Well, there's obviously going to be a long story here, and Sam, this has been a really interesting conversation. I've learned a lot. How can our listeners follow your work and keep up with the ideas that you're sharing?
Yeah, I work for Guidehouse Insights. We are the market research arm of Guidehouse Consulting's Energy Sustainability Infrastructure Group. So if you go to guidehouseinsights.com, there's a blog on there. I think it's under the tab latest insights or something like that at the top of the page. So you can find articles that are written by myself and the rest of our analyst team. We've also got the research reports that we publish that can be purchased. We also do custom research for clients. And you can also just Google my name and find stuff that I've written in other places as well, sites like Forbes and on my podcast called Wheel Bearings.
Well, Sam, thanks for spending this time with us today. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Great to talk to you.
We've been speaking with Guidehouse Insights Principal Analyst for E-Mobility, Sam Abuelsamid. You can follow his work and the ideas from all their analysts at guidehouseinsights.com. That's all one word, guidehouseinsights.com. The International Energy Agency recently released an updated version of its net zero energy roadmap, which said that while the progress toward electrification is still too slow, there's a viable path to keeping global warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius. EV battery innovations are one of the keys, as are investments in recycling and mining of critical materials. The trade-off that society is debating right now, often through the fog of a lot of political differences, is about how much extraction of new ore and other elements will be necessary to electrify the world without relying on fossil fuels. The IEA said that in the long run, humanity can lower its need for raw ore and oil by 2/3 for every unit of energy produced in 2050, reducing environmental damage from mining and many other impacts along the way. However, it's the next step after the mining and extraction, keeping those materials in use through recycling, that will determine the future of our extractive needs. So we need to recycle better. And we heard from Sam that there's a lot of opportunity. Sam's comments about the need to rethink vehicle ownership and material stewardship point to the emergence of many new services and financing strategies. We may lease parts of a car, particularly the battery, but let me suggest that the entire vehicle will become modular and that over time we may remove and replace parts from the battery to the integrated information services in the dashboard. Vehicle design will become more like a blank canvas on which personalized driving experiences can be built and reconfigured over time. Think about how you might remake a PC, replacing the graphics card and so forth as you use it over many years. When we buy a car, if buying is even the right word, we might also get to remake the vehicle with new capabilities that plug in and customize a used car to our needs. Electrification doesn't just mean a shift in energy sources, but a rethinking of the experience of driving, heating and cooling our homes, and living a sustainable lifestyle. There's a lot coming down the pike, and of course, we're going to keep you up to date here on the show. I hope you'll take a few minutes to share this podcast or any of the more than 430 interviews we've done on sustainability in your ear. Take a moment to write a review on your favorite podcast platform to help your neighbors find us, because, folks, you're the amplifiers that can spread more ideas to create less waste. Please tell your friends, family, coworkers that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, and other fine purveyors of podcast goodness. Thanks for the support. We really appreciate it. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.